And on the Department of State website, it actually says the same thing. There are a couple of things that they tell you not to do in other countries, and it's Department of States of that country as well tells you what not to do when you go other countries, including the United States. So in Russia's Department of State, it actually says, be aware that Americans do not like Russians, so when you're in the United States, don't say that I'm Russian as tourist. Just pretend to say like you're from another like Eastern European country to be safe. Just like how we warn our citizens, they warn their citizens too. But I think it's definitely a misconception because there is no such a thing, right? I mean, I've never heard of anybody beating up a Russian here or beating up an American over there.
That's true.
But it's on the Department of State's website, both websites. You go to US and then you go to Russia, that's what they say as a warning. Okay, so we talked about USSR, Soviet Union. After the collapse of Soviet Union, it's 15 countries were created. One of them, the largest one, Russia. We already talked about Russia has the largest land area in the world. So it was very important to the Soviet Union, which everything was based from Moscow, basically. And it was the first republic to be formed after the Bolshevik Revolution, right? In 1917, we said that after the collapse of Czar and after Bolshevik Communist Party took over, this was the first republic to be formed. And it was called at that time Russian Federated Socialist Republic. And then the other countries, the other smaller federates started joining Russian Federation too, which was the first ones were Ukraine and Belarus to form Soviet Union. And then after that, in 1992, and then after that, more and more. Other 13 countries, other 12 countries joined this three as well. Russian Federation accounted, as I said, Russian Federation was very important for Soviet Union because it accounted for 88% of Soviet land and major output source, so it was the largest one. The other 14 countries are very small, and some of them are extremely poor. Like Tajikistan is a very poor one, Turkmenistan is a very poor one. Although Kazakhstan is one of the richest ones, as well as Latvia. Latvia is it's a very small country, but it's a rich one compared to its size. After the collapse of Soviet Union, Russia basically wanted to implement a lot of capitalism platforms, and it proved to be wrong. It was very difficult after 70 years to change the mentality, culture, political ideologies, economic system, everything, because you had to fundamentally change the way people think, right? So people always thought that they envied the Western world. So they always thought that they were behind. So they wanted to make sure that they get ahead. But that mentality, when market is open and you have an envious mentality, unfortunately corruption happens all the time, which it did actually. It led them to corruption, very high corruption. Russia's GDP ranks 7th in the world and has consistently dropped for the last couple of years. I would like to go to CIA website and show you guys chart about Russia. How the country has been doing. So GDP, purchasing power, is 7th in the world. And per capita, it's 73 in the world. So when GDP, total country, and then per capita when divided by the population, it's 73 in the world. Now this is by composition: household consumption, government consumption, investment, investment in inventories. They don't have much agriculture. Agriculture is only 4.7. Industry is 30.2, and services 62%. Basically, Russia started off very poor, but it picked up in early 2000. So it was doing very good in early 2000. That's why, if you remember, at the year 2000, Jim O'Neill Goldman Sachs managing director, he said that for the next 15 years, rich countries, that's what the terminology was basically formed, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, because it was doing very good. After 10 years, so they collapsed early 1990s, and then for 10 years, it was a lot of up and down. In year 2000, they showed to be more stable, and they were on the path to rise. Because of the problems with Ukraine, because of the problems with for the last couple of years, and oil prices, because their main income is on oil, right? Oil and gas. They have the largest gas reserve in the world, and they have a huge oil reserve in Russia too. Unfortunately, it's too expensive to extract. So therefore, they're using the gas, but they literally provide the gas to the entire continent of Europe. So because of the oil and gas prices going down, and because of sanction on Russia, they lost a lot of revenue. They lost a lot of GDP. So that's why it's going down. And then we have United States and European countries, they put sanctions for the last couple of years again on them because of annexation of Crimea for Ukraine. Therefore, the economy has been sluggish a lot for the last couple of years. One important reason is their own corruption. Corruption has been very important, influential in their weak economy. Legacy of Russia is corruption is rampant, a culture of greed, unfortunately. We talked about the transportation, that they have problems because rivers flow from north to south, but commerce flows east to west. Climate, due to adverse climate, waterways are only open short period of time each year because it's extremely cold. Agriculture has always been inefficient in Russia, if you remember, because the government pulled out of the subsidies and funding the agriculture industry to the military industry. Now, transformation of the economy, one-party rule, we know that one-party rule it was for 70 years, and they had to change that one. The change was so much, it could not happen overnight. It could not happen within a couple of years. It needs actually a couple of decades to change all that 70 years of suppression. Remember, we talked about nomenclatural system, that only like the elite or people who work for government, they had access to better, basically quality products. Freedom of religion and freedom of speech were absent, completely absent. You would never talk, still, you just saw that they said, never talk about Putin, right? Even today, it's 2018, the guy right now in the video clip said, never talk about Putin or express your political opinion in Russia, right? So politics and religions are the two things that you don't talk in Russia. This is just a timeline. 1989, a new constitution was drafted by Mikhail Gorbachev. 1991, the Communist Party was formally abolished by Boris Yeltsin, which was the first president. 1993, the constitution was ratified. Government constitutes of the three branches of executive, legislative, judicial. But the more power goes to executive, rather than United States that is spread among the three. Executive branch has a lot of power, which is the president. It has been proven that it's been very difficult to transform centrally planned economy to an open market economy. Centrally planned was basically everything is from the central government, which was even stores are owned by government. So if you're working there, you're basically working for government facility. Everything, when I say stores, it could be grocery stores, it could be clothing stores, everything. And it was very difficult to privatize it. Now, these are the changes they had to do, yes.
So did they try to change it like within a couple of years, or?
Gradually? Yeah, we're gonna talk about it next slide, actually, yeah, that's what they tried to do. But it was not really efficient. It's mostly because of the culture that they had, envious culture that they had, and then corruption.
Right.
It really didn't work. These were actually the legal frameworks that they had to change. Contract laws. Remember, because everything was owned by government, there was no contract, right? So everybody was working for one employer, and that employer was government, and you don't own house, you don't own anything. So government gives you the housing, so there's no contract. So think about this, how big of a change they have to do to basically for people, for so many years they've been under Communist Party. Now people have to learn the contract. Of course it's going to be corruption, right? Lack of knowledge, greed. Bankruptcy law. If nobody has a business, there's no bankruptcy law, right? Now that they're going to privatize it, people will have business. Now they have to add another bankruptcy law to it. Property laws. Nobody owns any properties. Now people are going to own properties, their own property. Competition laws. There's going to be more industries, privatized industries. They need to know if they can have monopoly, oligopoly, pure competition. Securities laws for bonds and stocks. And intellectual property laws. So these are just a couple examples of the laws that they had to change in the country. So think about how fundamental changes they had to be done. That's why it was not very successful. Shock therapy versus gradualism. We talked about shock therapy, I guess, right? Last time? Oh no, it wasn't last time. Shock therapy basically in the past, when they wanted to, old days, when somebody was a little acting not mentally sound, they would take him to mental institution and they would give him shock, right? They would put him in a bathtub and electricity, something like that. Your book actually explains what they do. So anyways, that's shock therapy. Nowadays, it says, as a matter of fact, Prozac that we use, these days everybody uses Prozac, I guess in the United States a lot of people use Prozac. That's replacement of shock therapy in reality. So if whoever is using Prozac, if we were at that time, they would give us shock therapy, literally. So it's being replaced right now. Like scientifically, it's been replaced by that. So it says, instead of putting them on Prozac, gradually to basically teach or be taught how to change, they put them on shock therapy. It was such a huge shock that they never recovered. It was a very big shock, all of a sudden opened up everything to them. Now, what government did? Prices were decentralized. Now everything has to have a price, right? Cuts in defense happened and agriculture subsidies. New tax system was introduced. Foreign trade was liberalized. The ruble became convertible because their currency was not convertible, okay? You could not convert the currency. Prices for consumer goods could seek consumer demand, and prices rose to the point that a lot of people could not afford. Now, let me tell you how they did the trade. Let's talk about privatization. This is basically how they privatized it. These are different methods of privatization. Either they actually gave voucher to people, and they said, with this voucher, you can buy a property if you want, or the property you're working at right now. If it was a clothing store, whatever it was, you can buy this with your voucher. Now, the voucher at that time, if you convert it to dollar, was $25, right? So because they couldn't buy, most of them couldn't buy the entire, basically, shop, usually they put money together, a couple of them that were working in that shop, they put money together, all of them, to buy that, basically, store, okay? That was a voucher system. The other one was for smaller businesses, such as coffee shop and all that. They put it for auction, such as restaurant or dry cleaning. Most of the times, only Nomenclatura, the government people, had enough money to buy those small businesses. Other people, they would only go by voucher, which is $25, and that's it. They have to put money together. They could actually sell their voucher to someone else and receive the $25, for example. Give away state enterprises to workers and managers. Now, big enterprises, what they did, they gave them to the managers of that enterprise. If it was a big facility, for example, everybody was working for government, right? But they had rankings of managers and lower levels and all that. They gave those big enterprises to managers, which is, again, part of Nomenclatura, because people who were poor still, they couldn't get anything. Sell state enterprises to workers and managers, again, the same thing. Either give it away or sell it for some money. Sell state enterprises to foreign investors. Now, to foreign investors, a lot of investors, after a couple of years, were interested, just like what we talked about around the year 2000, late 1990s. A lot of investors were interested. Unfortunately, a lot of foreign investors did go to Russia, they invest in Russia, but the corruption forced them all out. IKEA's managing director for Russia, he basically says they have the most lawsuit for any multinational corporations against them, against IKEA in Russia. Why? Because government of Russia is suing them right and left because they're not paying bribe. So a lot of multinational corporations already left Russia. IKEA said we want to resist and we'll stay here because we have a very good consumer demand. Consumers actually love IKEA in Russia. However, government proved, he basically said in his interview, he basically said, we actually change every couple years because we cannot survive, like managing directors, the ones that are over there, managing director of IKEA for that region. They're like, we change every couple years because you cannot survive there because of the pressure of government. He was like, for some period of time, for about a year, I was at the court at least 1 day a week. So instead of paying attention to my job, heavy load job that I have, I had to go to court all the time. So you have to consider and they said in the interview, he said, we're gonna stay in Russia and we will not comply with the Russian government bribing them basically. So it proved to be extremely difficult for foreigners to invest in Russia and stay there. They did, at the end of 1990s they did. It was basically a lot of demand to invest in Russia, but when it's demand in Russia, to invest in Russia, the ruble prices value goes high because it's a demand for that currency, right? The currency is ruble. The ruble actually value appreciated. But just recently, for last like 7-8 years, that all those investors are coming out, sanctions apply, low prices of gas and oil, the ruble prices, because the demand is going lower, the value depreciated as well. Privatization aid here, it says actually based on 10,000 ruble or $25 at a time. Mass privatization was completed in 1994, and then they started privatization of agriculture, was similar to industries, but they started subsidizing, government subsidized it. This is basically the value of ruble today, 65 rubles is $1. So it has really, really depreciated a lot. And this is the trend. There are two-tier banks, central bank, which is a regulating overdraft and credit interest, and then commercial bank, which works under central bank. We have like that. We have a central bank, which is Federal Reserve, and then we have commercial banks. We also have investment banks too, which they don't. Public finance. This is taxation. They tax like non-residents and residents. The tax is high. Basically 30%, flat 30% in Russia. So the tax for them is high too. People are not used to paying taxes. They don't like paying taxes. It's a lot of corruption. They get away not paying taxes. At that time, before collapse of Soviet Union, what Russia did, or their foreign trade, was basically based on barter. So people, for example, Russia has gas, will give to Hungary, which has agriculture, for example. They would barter, right? People have learned barter a lot. So, because there was not much cash going on in society, right? So people learned barter. At this time, that's why people don't like to pay a lot of taxes. Tax is something extraordinary to those people. This basically says the foreign trade, that they only traded with Council for Mutual Economic Assistance, which was between all these Eastern Bloc countries, and trade was basically based on barter. Now, an evaluation of the Russian Federation. This is what happened after the collapse of Soviet Union. It ranks number 135 out of 180 countries around the world as far as corruption. Okay? So it's very, very corrupt. Scores 29 out of 100, the higher, the more transparent a nation is. So 29, they're not transparent, they're very corrupt, right? Wealth and poverty ranks 57 out of 157 countries. Higher number indicates more equal wealth distribution. The closer you're to 157, more equal wealth distribution. That means they're very, very unequal. Gini index is 41.2, which indicates an extremely unequal wealth distribution. Russia has the highest level of wealth inequality in the world. And financial problems, US and European sanction, as we talked about it, because after of Crimea's annexation, lowered oil prices and gas prices, they all led to decline of ruble. That's why Russian Federation is suffering a lot these days. Political instability. Politics in Russia showed that, well, because a lot of people, if you talk to Russians about Putin, it's an extremely sensitive topic. A lot of them, believe it or not, they love Putin, and a lot don't, right? But the ones that don't do not have the freedom of expression, basically. That's why the guy in the video clip says it's just don't talk about it. There is no freedom of expression. Their system is federal semi-presidential Republic of Russia because it's a dual executive system, because prime minister works alongside of president. Usually you have either president or prime minister, but they have both. In Germany, for example, they have president and chancellor, which acts like a prime minister. Russia ranks 161 out of 194 countries in the political stability index. The score is between minus 2.5 of 2 plus 2.5, which is a strong. They're minus 0.89, so they're very weak when it comes to political stability. Cashless society, as I said, because of the value of ruble, because it depreciated, a lot of people prefer to use barter rather than ruble. Because when you have money, if you don't convert it to dollar, really, the value of your currency might even depreciate more next month because it's just going down, right? So a lot of people prefer to convert it to dollar or to another stable, or euro, to another stable currency, and just don't use the cash money they have or currency and do barter. That's why it led them to a cashless society. For example, the credit system that we have, it's something very interesting to them because they never had the currency, they never had a credit system. So credit cards, they have used a lot of credit cards, they had debts, and then they had to stop it. It was stopped, now they're not using. Half-state dimension, this is just a comparison between United States and Russia. Power distance, remember we said in Gini index how their wealth distribution is unequal. It's 93, one of the highest in the world. They used to be a lot less, but now they're one of the highest in the world. They actually passed India and the Philippines, which India and Philippines used to be the highest one in the world. Now Russia is the highest one. Individualism, they're very collectivistic societies, right? So they actually value their friendship and the society, what is better for my community, for my society, rather than what is better for me as an individual. Masculinity, surprisingly enough, they are actually a feminine society. They do care about like next generation, better healthcare, better education system, and all that, rather than masculine societies which focuses on wealth accumulation and prestige and status in society. Uncertainty avoidance. In United States, we would like to avoid, we don't avoid uncertainties, we don't avoid risks. They do avoid risks almost 100%. So they don't like to take a lot of risks. And let me tell you this, usually when we talk about risks, it comes from two fundamental reasons. One is institutional framework, one is the formal institutional framework and informal institutional framework. Formal institutional framework is how government supports you, basically. If you fail, you take risk and you fail, right? That's what's called risk. So if you fail, how government supports you? Do they have a good law? Can the person get back up again and start continuing their business? So what is the support for me? The informal institutional law is basically the culture of society, how they will look at you when you fail. Because they'll look down at you when you fail, therefore they prefer not to take much risk. Just like Koreans, they don't like to take risks because if you fail, it's a failure to society. Most of the times, this goes hand in hand with this one. If you're collectivistic, because you're too much in your community society, society will look down on you if you fail. If you're individualistic, nobody cares. It's up to you, right? So you can't take risks. Usually this go hand in hand. There are actually negative correlations. Long-term orientation, you really have to get to know them a lot. Just like Chinese and Japanese. You have to make a strong bond, relationship with them. And you know what? Countries that you make bond and relationship is based on loyalty, and you don't need much contracts. Here we have very detailed contracts, right? Like 100 pages of contracts. If you want to buy a house or rent a house or something, you sign so many things you don't know what you're signing, right? It's because we don't have the relationship. In countries that are collectivistic and they are based on long-term orientation, they are based on relationship. They don't, as a matter of fact, in some countries, if you give them contracts, they're offended. They're like, I already told you and you know that I'm loyal, so why are you giving me so many pages of contracts that I have to sign? Just like the example of American that went to Japan, they wanted to sign like 100 pages, they're like, we're not gonna sign anything, this is so offensive. Let's get to know each other first, for 6 months, for a year, and then we don't even need to sign all these contracts. And then in indulgence, actually, they are more conservative with their money rather than Americans. And that was about Russia. I think we have two presentations, if I'm not wrong.